Thanks for tuning in to CPTV. I'm here with Conan Nolan, a political reporter with NBC4 in Los Angeles. Now, Conan, you are a Cal Poly graduate, and can you just take me back to your time at Cal Poly, what you remember, some favorite memories of yours?
Well, I actually grew up in San Luis Obispo. My dad was a professor here years ago, and so Poly was put bread on our family table for many years, and so it was part of the family. Journalism was an interesting program, and I gravitated to it because I had a love for writing and was interested in it. I have to tell you, though, that KCPR existed at the time. There was no television station, but there were some very good instructors. And the colleagues of mine who I keep in touch with, who also were Poly at that time and eventually graduated, we all think of some of those instructors because of how important they were, not to just the skill set that we developed at the school, but the pearls of wisdom that we cling to years later. There are plenty of times where you'll be under deadline, and if in order to focus, you'll think of what maybe Jim Hayes told you at a certain point. That's what you've got to do when it comes to getting the product out. So it was all instruction, and I know there's terrific instruction today. There was terrific instruction back then, and it's the reason I'm in the business.
So can you share some of those pearls of wisdom, as you call them, things that have stayed relevant?
It's not poetry. That was one of them. Jim Hayes, remember, when you have an opportunity, when you're facing a deadline, you're not going to have a first, second, or third draft. It's going to be this draft. That's all you have time for. Don't try to make it poetic. Just actually get the information down, the 5 W's, and things like that that remind you, keep you grounded as to what your purpose is. And in the case of a clock ticking down to a deadline, not getting fancy, just getting it done. Mm-hmm. And the importance of being completely and utterly accurate. Don't ever assume anything. And a number of those things that that over time you heard, there was great repetition, and you were able to use to great purpose over the course of a career. So there are lots of them. That's one of them.
What's something that Cal Poly should never change about the curriculum, always keep a part of the curriculum, or what do you think that journalism schools should definitely be teaching to the students right now? We've seen such a change in the media landscape in the recent years, and you've been a witness to that.
Writing. I think there's some students who enter broadcasting thinking that you don't have to be as good a writer in broadcasting as you do in print, because there isn't as much of it. Just the opposite's true. There's an economy of words in broadcasting. With the World Wide Web and the advent of digital, there's a tremendous amount of content out there. And so it even strengthens the importance of your content being accurate and reaching to a public in a way that perhaps nobody else can. And so writing is extremely important. And so whereas there's all sorts of technical aspects to the industry that you want to address, the fact is that putting pen to paper or a keyboard to a workspace, it's important for you to be able to know how to create and communicate in the written word.
What was one of your first jobs out of college, and how did you make that transition from being a student to being a reporter?
My first job was at KVEC, and I was the assistant news director. And keep in mind that when I left Poly, I wasn't interested so much in television. I just wanted to be in journalism.
Okay.
Print broadcasting would be great, but I just wanted to do it. And radio, I'll never forget my first day. I got $5.75 a month was my salary. But that didn't matter. The idea that they were paying me to provide content, we didn't call it content back then, but actually work in news, was astounding. And that was just incredible. And I'll never forget the first day I listened on the radio, and the news director, a guy named Mike Powell, actually read my copy and played the 8 tracks of the interviews that I had cut. I was ecstatic. I just couldn't believe that I actually was paid to put news on TV. And so it was a great learning experience. And that's what your first job is. There are plenty of people who go on to graduate school, which is great, but KVEC was sort of my graduate school, as was KSBY when I got the job
Here
in
in
television.
San Luis Obispo.
Both in San Luis Obispo, which is also something that I didn't appreciate. But anything in broadcasting, even if it's radio, is and even print for that matter, is an avenue to get into television. A lot of students don't think that. They think they have to choose, go one to the other. Fact is that knowledge is power. The more you know about journalism, the more it'll translate. And there are plenty of people who, in San Luis Obispo, KSBY was an example, who they have a choice. They can either hire somebody from outside the market who gave them a resume tape that they're not exactly sure how accurate that tape is. Now, is that really your work? Or they can hire somebody who's locally working in radio or in print, who knows the area, who knows how to. We know you make a deadline because you're making it on the radio every day. We will train you how to do TV. You bring us the journalism part. And so there are a number of ways to get a job in this business. I think most students should always keep that in mind, that you can start in a number of different ways to eventually make your way into a television career.
Something that I've learned is that a lot of this field you learn on the job. So what's something that you remember learning really early on as a journalist, just on the job, you just figured it out there in the field?
Well, I'll never forget the transition from being on radio to being on television. You needed a picture for everything. And that was a revelation, because they said, well, yes, you're talking about the city council has proposed this new building for this intersection. You need a picture of the artist's sketch of the building, or where's the intersection. And it was very confining. But one of the things that remember, journalism is a study of everything else. And so I keep telling students, knowledge is power. Before you enter into the job market, you should understand something. You don't have to be an expert, but you should know something about seismology, because you're going to be covering an earthquake. We know that. And in broadcasting, you'll be in front of a television or on radio with all sorts of time, because we're covering this earthquake and we have very little information. So you've got to know something about earthquakes and that region to be able to vamp while you get information about damage or the size of the quake, whatever. You should know something about firefighting. You know, what's a strike team? Because the same thing's going to happen. There's going to be a big fire in this countryside behind us, and you're going to be on camera. And you should know something about what you're talking about. Floods. So there are certain stories. You should know the basics of law enforcement. What's a preliminary hearing? You should know something about government. You know, who's the bicameral legislature? What does the lieutenant governor do? You don't have to be an expert, but you should know the fundamentals, because you will be covering that, and you'll be covering it right out of college. Your first job, you're going to be in the process of trying to navigate that area of society. And so that's also, you want to know the applications, how things work, but you also want to know all about that which you're going to be covering.
So during your career, you have focused a lot on politics. How did you make that transition into being a political reporter, and how did you familiarize yourself with all
Well,
that
anybody who's a political reporter at any level all started as a general assignment reporter.
Right.
So for years, I covered everything that you would normally cover.
The earthquakes, the fires,
the
floods.
Exactly. Over time, if you reach a station that has enough resources to devote to one specific area, and in LA we have somebody who covers health. He's an MD, he's a doctor. We had somebody who used to cover law. He was an attorney. We have somebody who we hired just to cover entertainment. Well, so there is a position there because there's so much politics to cover politics. And frequently you just wait your turn, because at my station there was a woman who was already covering politics. Mm-hmm. Linda Douglas was her name. She ended up in the White House under Obama. Then after her there was a guy named Saul Halpert, and then there was Jess Marlowe. And then eventually the job opens up, and you're the guy who has the connections. And so if you can tell a reasonable story, politics can be dry. If you can try to make it interesting and relevant to people, and you're at a place where they devote the resources to that, you can make a go of it.
Just finally, what advice would you give to someone who's an aspiring journalist? Is there a bit of advice that someone gave you early on that you can still remember?
Well, yeah. My advice is this. First of all, if this is what you want to do, make sure that you remember that 90% of the game is perseverance. Don't let anything get in your way. You've got to work at it. But if this is the career you want, don't be satisfied with anything other than a job in this business. It can be done. Remember that wherever you apply for a job, there will always be somebody who has more experience than you. And the next time, when you do talk to somebody about a career, and they say, "Well, we're thinking about you. You don't have. We have other." Well, listen, I'm sure you've got people who have experience from other stations. What you won't get is somebody who will work harder than I'll work. There's nobody out there who is more committed to the success of this operation. This is what I want to do, and if I work for you, that's great. If I don't work for you, I'm going to work for somebody else, which is your way of telling that person you're going to be hired by their competitor. And then finally, you want to have an understanding of all the platforms. Don't go out there thinking that you're just going to be a television person. You want to know as much as you possibly can about every aspect of journalism. You should have your own website. You should have your own YouTube channel. You should, I would say, invest in a laptop and an edit platform and a camera and start producing your own news stories, because not only does that help you get into the frame of mind of when you are employed by a station, but it shows a news director that, well, this person, wow, they already know the industry. They're multidimensional. And that's exactly what we need, because we cross-platform everything now. It's not just a broadcast, it's a webcast. And so think in those terms of what it takes in order to advance your particular name and to know as much about as many different platforms in this business as possible.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. A lot of great information for Cal Poly journalism students and anyone trying to break into this business. Thank you for joining us, Conan.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for tuning in.